Hey everyone, and welcome to Dominion Cards, a video series where we take a look at the strategy of various Dominion cards in depth. Today we're looking at Vassal. This is a 3-cost action card from the 2nd edition base game, and when you play it, it says +2 coins, discard the top card of your deck. If it is an action card, you may play it. Now this is probably the most complicated card in the base set, not complicated in terms of its instructions, which are fairly simple, but complicated in terms of the strategy and deciding whether or not you want to add this to your deck, and when, and how many. So when you play Vassal, one or two things can generally happen. Either you find an action card and you choose to play it. When you do that, while you spend an action to play Vassal, that other action card that you discarded, you get to play for free. It doesn't cost you an action. So you can think of Vassal in that regard, sort of being like giving you an extra +1 card and +1 action. It tends to be largely equivalent to that in most cases. Cards that give you +1 card, +1 action, and 2 coins are actually very, very good. I have here on screen examples of Conspirator and Grand Market. These are 2 cards that can give you +1 card, +1 action, and 2 coins. And these 2 cards are considered very, very strong cards, actually. So Vassal's in good territory with that. But when Vassal misses, either because it didn't find an action card or you chose not to play the action card, what you've done is you spent an action on 2 coins and discarding a card off the top of your deck. This is really bad as terms of effects go. In fact, Terminal Silver, I would say, is probably one of the worst ways to spend an action just for 2 coins. You can almost any card out there will be better than that. I'd say the only thing worse than spending an action on 2 coins and just 2 coins is to not spend the action at all. So Vassal, in that regard, there is a big disparity between when it hits and when it misses. When it hits, you got a good effect, but when it misses, you just sort of waste an action that you were hoping that you would have available, and that can be completely crippling. Like if you're trying to draw a deck and play a load of action cards that you want to play, and you just start losing actions that you can't then spend on the other cards. You can kill your turn. You start in the middle of drawing your deck, you play a Vassal, it doesn't find an action. That could be the end of your turn, and you didn't get to do hardly any of what you expected to do this turn. That can cripple you completely. You can lose the game from that. So the cost is massive for this to miss. So whether or not you add Vassal to your deck at all, and how many, is largely going to be based on how much you can avoid having that crippling miss punishment essentially affect you. Something important to note here with Vassal, silver also costs 3 coins. It also provides you 2 coins when you play it, but it never costs an action. So really, Vassal's improvement over silver is that it has a chance of drawing you a card. That's sort of what you're getting over silver, apart from various other ancillary benefits of it being an action card, right? And +1 card on a silver is really good, right? But that's essentially it. It's just it's a silver, draws you a card. So let's take a look now at what sort of things we can do to make Vassal mitigate this risk, make it a lot better. We're going to start off with what I consider to be the best sort of cards you can get and effects to make Vassal worthwhile, and then as we go along we'll slowly start looking at the slightly less good things. So first of all, instead of relying on random luck of the draw to see, just hope that the card on top of your deck is the card you want. What if you got to look at various cards on your deck? Now, some cards do what I call deck inspection. So they reveal or look out to the top X number of cards on your deck. They look at them. Sometimes you get the option to discard them, or some discarding happens automatically. And then you put the rest back in any order. Now, this is really nice because if you can look at a couple of action cards and you can shuffle the order around, that you can put on top of your deck an action card, and it can be exactly the action card that you want to play next. In addition to that, a further benefit is that if a Vassal is within those cards, you can put the Vassal on top of your deck, and then another card you want to play on like slot 2. And then one Vassal from your hand, you play it, it hits the other Vassal you've put on top of your deck, and you get this like Vassal chain, and that sort of allows you to basically guarantee multiple Vassals work with one play. You don't have to worry about the other Vassal then, you've got the benefit from it, and you've drawn through your deck. Wandering Minstrel, I've put here as an example. I need to give this card a shout out. This is like a power combo with Vassal. Wandering Minstrel is probably the best card you can have for Vassal, because Wandering Minstrel is already very, very strong. It's a village with this deck inspection effect, and it automatically discards any non-action cards that it finds. That's really powerful. In general, and with Vassal, it does pretty much everything you want Vassal to do to guarantee. It's really strong, and it's quite cheap as well. Sentry from the base game. This is another very good one, because while it has a much smaller deck inspection effect, it does trash all of those coppers and estates and curses that you don't want. So it helps give you a nice clean, thin deck. And once you've done all that trashing, you've got a minor inspection effect for Vassal, so that's quite nice there. It's also in the same set as Vassal, of course, which means you're going to play a lot of games probably. People play base game the most in terms of like any individual set, so that's nice there. Top decking, I would consider the second best thing. So instead of relying on luck of the draw to find out what Vassal's going to hit or what's within the first X card of your deck, what if you just choose the card that you want to play next and you just put it on top of your deck? That takes out all of the risk completely. So I've given 2 more examples here. Artisan, also in the base game. This one's really nice because let's say you think, I could really use a laboratory right now. You just pick one up with Artisan, you gain it, and then you put it on top of your deck. Then if you have another action, you can play Vassal and just immediately play that laboratory while also getting 2 money, right? Hey, that's excellent. Right, takes all the risk out of Vassal, gets you better cards. Courtyard, which I've put here from Intrigue, this also needs a shout out. So Courtyard, if it's your main draw, every time you play a Courtyard, you end up putting a card on top of your deck. So Courtyard, you can end up playing quite a lot of them, which is what you were going to be doing anyway, and you just get all of these opportunities to just keep playing Vassal. You want to alternate between like Courtyard and Village. Just have your Courtyard top deck a Village, and then play a Vassal and play that Village, right? Like just lots and lots of opportunities, which lets you support quite a few Vassals. Another thing is, what if your deck consisted of only one card and you knew what that card was? Well, there's no risk, there's no randomness involved at all, and you can do that sometimes. So a good example is let's say you have to draw your deck for this to work. So you've drawn your deck, and then you have a mid-turn gainer like Workshop or a gainer that works in your action phase. It gains a card costing up to 4, so you could gain like a Throne Room or something, and it goes into your discard pile. And because you'd already drawn every card that you own, you don't have a draw pile, you didn't have a discard pile. Now you've got a discard pile with exactly 1 card in it. So you know what Vassal's going to hit if you play that. So if you can consistently draw your deck, Vassal's going to be a little bit better than a silver because you've just got that extra +1 card, and you can just play the card that you gained that turn. Play and gain is very strong. If you can gain a card during a turn and then play it in that same action phase, wow, that's pretty great. That's a very fast acceleration of your deck. Alternatively, some cards like Poacher might discard a card. So Poacher, which is also in the base set, if one supply pile is empty, it will discard a card. So you can discard a card that you want to play after you've drawn your deck, or just before you draw your deck. And then Vassal comes along once you finish drawing, and you can just play it. So something now I call Top Deck Reveal. So this is sort of a variation on Deck Inspection, except you only look at 1 card. So this is a lot more random than Deck Inspection, but basically some cards will just look at the top card of your deck, and they might do something with it, or they might put it back. And for those where you get to put it back, that means you now know what the top card of your deck is. So I'm giving some examples here. So Mystic, you have to guess the top card of your deck. If you guess correctly, you put it in your hand. Otherwise, you put it back. So what you can do with Mystic is you can guess for your provinces or your coppers or your estates or whatever. And if you grab them, then, great. If you don't and you revealed an action instead, well, a vassal in your hand might be able to draw that now in its place. And vassals are a lot cheaper than mystics, so it's easier to get the vassals. So that can be a nice way, instead of getting another vassal if you just missed out, like on a mystic. Will-o-wisp from Nocturne. Sometimes these cards, you can gain quite a lot of will-o-wisps. And will-o-wisp, so you can just play lots and lots of them, and they all reveal the top card of your deck. They draw the cheap ones, so they'll draw your coppers and estates, and they'll put the others back. Ironmonger is a very powerful 4-cost card from Dark Ages. It can, it's like a village if you reveal an action, and that's nice as well. So it's sort of like, in that regard, a much weaker Wandering Minstrel. But, if it finds something that's not an action, well, it can discard that and keep going. So top deck reveal, one thing to note is that because you're much, much less likely to find what you want, because you're only looking at one card, you can't really support as many vassals, because these aren't going to guarantee you an action card on top of your deck as often as you might like. There will be times when they miss. So if you had 8 Ironmongers, that doesn't mean you're going to get 8 guaranteed plays of Vassal, because not every Ironmonger's going to do what you want. They're not all going to show you that you've got an action card on top of your deck, and therefore you can play Vassal safely. I did want to talk just quickly about 2 more cards on this category that aren't quite as good as you might think. So Magpie is interesting. When it looks at the top card of your deck, if it's a treasure, it puts it in your hand. If it's an action, it gains another Magpie. Well, that sounds great with Vassal, right? If it hits a Vassal, you gain a Magpie, right? But just bear in mind that if that Vassal had been a silver, it would actually draw that silver. So the benefit of Vassal over silver is that it has +1 card sometimes. But Magpie means that silver is sometimes +1 card instead. Of course, if the alternate is true, if a Vassal was already in your hand and Magpie reveals another Magpie, well, now you can play that other Magpie by playing your Vassal, which you couldn't do with silver. So it's not very clear with Magpie whether it's very good with Vassal or not, and it's going to depend a lot on the board, but it isn't quite as good. Even though you can get a lot of them, maybe it's fine, but, it's not necessarily. You could have probably done just as well with silver, and you might not get the advantage you think out of Vassal. Herald is not a combo at all. Herald, if it finds an action card on top of your deck, it will play it automatically. So it just sort of does exactly what Vassal is trying to do. And every time a Vassal misses, you can get these Herald chains that play themselves, but then every time, Herald misses, you guarantee, that what's left on top of your deck is not an action card, because if it was an action, Herald would have played it already. So when you have Heralds, you keep ending up in situations where you can't use the Vassals that you've added to your deck. So Herald is the anti-synergy with Vassal a lot of the time. So do watch out for that one. Next on our list, we have Strong Trashing. So, what if every card in your deck was an action card? Well, you know that Vassal's going to hit an action card, so hey, that improves your odds, right? Get rid of all those coppers and your estates. One thing to watch out, though, I said that improves your odds. I didn't say that guarantees that it will work. Sometimes with Vassal, you can end up revealing a card, if you're playing it blind, that you actually didn't want to play right now. So let's say you're using a Village Smithy deck to draw your deck. You're alternating between Village and Smithy, and then at one point you've got 1 action left, but you don't have a Village in your hand. If you play Vassal and it reveals a Smithy, well, that's the end of your turn, right? Whether you play the Smithy or not, you are out of actions, and your turn probably just died in the middle. Now, to be fair, if the Vassal was a silver, it probably would have died anyway, but the thing is that the Vassal, though, it's not the cantrip getting you through your deck that you might have hoped for, and some other card that gives +1 card, +1 action actually would have worked. So it might have been better with that instead. Another thing to watch out with Strong Trashing is that at some point, usually, you're going to have to start adding victory cards to it. And when your deck is really thin, Where as soon as you start adding victory cards, they proportionally make quite a large difference, because a larger percentage of your deck is now made out of victory cards. So this is why decks largely made out of cantrips, you might think, oh, I can add a Vassal, because that's sort of like a cantrip. Sorry, just to explain, a cantrip is a card that gives +1 card, +1 action. That's a standard terminology. I should probably explain that here. So we're looking at stuff like Poacher, like Market, like Merchant, like Sentry. Cantrips, if your deck is just those, well, maybe not Sentry, then you will find that Vassal, it doesn't always act like the cantrip. It can KO your turn, and then you don't get to play the rest of the cantrips, so that can be a problem. Another thing to do is we can say here, this is like the weakest at this point, if Vassal could randomly lose us an action, what if we just had extra actions, and then losing that action isn't such a big deal, right? Like, if we bought a bunch of villages, more than we needed, then we could miss a Vassal or two, and it's probably okay, because we have a spare action. The problem with this is that when you miss Vassal and it turns into a terminal silver, this is one of the weakest uses of plus action. You can probably do better than just a dud Vassal, right? That's not really what you want to be spending your actions on. In addition to that, you think you've just bought a load of villages or gained them just to weather Vassal missing, when what you could have done was got something else that was better, right? For example here, if Vassal was silver instead, and you used those actions on smithies, you can do a lot better than Vassal. Vassal drew you 1 card, that's nice. Or it could have done sometimes, whereas the smithy will draw you 3 every time. Wow, that's a lot better. And if one of those cards was a silver, well, you've got your 2 coins that you wanted. So, unless you have, like, Champion, which is giving you literally unlimited actions, buying extra villages just to support Vassal, it's sort of like a bit of a waste of time, right? You can just avoid buying the villages by getting silvers instead. Now, last but not least, and this probably sounds like funny advice, but here we go. Every time you play a Vassal, you are giving yourself potentially a chance to miss. That's if you're playing them blind and you haven't done one of the things that guarantees that the play works. One way to stop you from getting a miss is to just give yourself less opportunities to have a miss by just getting less Vassals, right? Like, the easiest way to avoid a Vassal failure from ending your turn is to just not play a Vassal, or to even never buy one, right? But that doesn't mean that you should never buy a Vassal, right? Vassal, like, as I've said before, if you have the opportunity with, like, a top decker card to guarantee a Vassal play at some point, maybe you can support 1 Vassal. If you're expecting to draw your deck and you have a workshop, maybe you can support 1 Vassal, right? It's fine, right? It might be better than another cantrip like Poacher, because it gives you 2 coins instead. But, like, Vassal en masse, like, if you try and think to yourself, I'm going to have a deck where, like, half of my cards are Vassal, you will find that tends not to work. And I sort of say that from experience. It is possible, but hard to build a deck where you have a lot of Vassals. In reality, most of the time, you are just not going to have many Vassals, because every time you add a Vassal, you are potentially running that chance of just losing an action, getting a terminal silver, and that's really bad. It's very punishing. So just have less of them. One final warning, and this may be obvious, but just in case you weren't aware, if there is no card to discard, because you've already got all of your cards in your hand or in play, Vassal, that's a guaranteed fail, right? So that will always spend an action. So if you've drawn your entire deck and you've got all of these Vassals in your hand, that's a problem, because now if you want to play them and get the money, you've got to spend an action on each one. If they were all silvers, that wasn't the case, because silvers don't cost you the action. So if you have, like, very, very strong, very quick drawing, you can end up where while you're drawing your deck, you just decide, I don't really want to take the risk right now to play the Vassal. Maybe you end up never getting that opportunity, and then you just never play it. And it's like, whoops, that was bad. Shouldn't have ever bought the Vassal then. It sort of made your deck worse, because now you've added this card that's basically doing the equivalent of like a curse, right? It's just sitting there, taking up space. You got to draw it, and you're not using it. And that's terrible. Also, if Vassal is the bottom card of your deck and you weren't doing the one card in your discard trick, that Vassal, you never get the opportunity to actually play that except as a terminal silver, right? It's just unfortunate. The more cards you have, the less likely that is to happen. The less Vassals you have, the less likely that is to happen. But when it does happen, well, that's sad, right? You sort of run a risk that you can't, even though you're like drawing your entire deck, you actually can't get all of the money that you expected to have. So Vassal, for that reason, Vassal is generally considered to be quite weak. I say for that reason, I mean for all of the reasons that I've just explained. It's just so punishing to get wrong, and you're just constantly taking these gambles, and you can't really afford to do. Dominion's already a pretty random game in many regards. You're often looking to try and make your deck more reliable, and sometimes Vassal can make your deck less reliable, and that's just to give you +1 card over buying a silver. Like, is it worth it? It's hard to say, but generally, like, Vassal decks aren't a thing. Basically, Vassal is a thing that you can add in for support. Sometimes give you a little bit more reliability, sometimes give you that little bit of extra card draw that helps. Sometimes it's just terrible, and you just barely want any. Is it like bottom 20% like Cellar? I think it's pretty close. It's probably not quite that, but generally Vassal is overall considered to be quite weak, compared to like Conspirator, where once they start succeeding, they'll always succeed, and you can just play lots of them, and you've drawn your deck. It doesn't matter, you just keep playing them, get lots of money. Vassal, you can't live the dream in that way. One last thing I wanted to do, I just wanted to talk about this fun interaction. I try to avoid focusing too much on like particular card combos on these videos, but this one's really fun, so I thought I'd just give it a shout out. Village Green is a village that when you discard it, you get to reveal it and play it immediately. So if you discard this with Vassal, you can reveal the Village Green and play it, and then the Vassal gets a chance to play it a second time. So you actually get a doubled effect. It's like you throne roomed this card. So this can be pretty good with Vassal. Because now the Village Green is giving you draw, right? You've gained 2 cards with it. You've actually increased your hand size if you play it now each time, the Village Green. So yeah, that's pretty cool, I think. Watch out for that one. Village Green is quite powerful generally, so you'll probably have it in your deck. Now we're just going to go back to, like we did last time, we're going to generate some random base game kingdoms, and we're just going to see how Vassal fares in these. So all of these kingdoms are going to have Vassal in it, and we're not going to play the kingdom, we're just going to take a look at them. So here we have what's going on. So we have Festival is our only village. We have Smithy and Lab is a pretty good draw. Festivals are only buy. What's our trashing? It's remodel. So getting rid of the coppers is quite difficult here. In addition to that, the only way we can do a guaranteed Vassal play on this board is if we draw our entire deck and then use Poacher when a pile is empty to discard a card and play it. But what's the value there? Well, we wouldn't really care if it was like a laboratory or anything, or a smithy. I mean, maybe... Oh, no, sorry, we can play the remodel and use that to gain a card. But what card is it going to gain here? Because we're just going to have, with Witch, we're going to have a bunch of curses, a bunch of coppers. It's not very good. All it will gain us is like Cellar and Moat, and we don't really care to play that at the end of our turn. And we're just going to have a load of coppers and junk. Yeah, so I think Vassal is bad here. I think your deck doesn't get clean enough, and I think when your only village is Festival, you've got Labs and Smithies, fine, but actually I think, and Witch, but I think you're going to probably struggle to draw your deck a bit here. So I think Vassal has no room in this deck. You just, the odds are too low on it, and you can't really play it with any sort of good value. So I think Vassal doesn't get touched on this board, and you never use it. It's just too risky. Let's go again. So what have we got here? So here we've got Moneylender and Remodel. We can trash absolutely everything. We've got Village and Throne Room as like ways to get extra actions. We've got Council Room to draw. We've got Market. So we've got a lot of cantrips. We've got Merchant, Poacher, Market. Market gives us buy. We probably never need to play Council Room just because we don't like giving our cards the extra card. Vassal is nice here. It can gain markets and then you can play it with Vassal, guaranteed at any time. Poacher will probably get to a stage where it's discarding a card, so you can do that as well. And you can use that to play more markets, like, or whatever you have left over, a throne room to play on something else. I think you can support a couple of vassals here. I think you will eventually trash down your deck to nice things. And although it's very cantrippy, which is fine, like you can fit a couple of vassals in. Throne room, I think you will actually have a reasonable abundance of actions because you're going to like throne room markets because you want more reasonable cantrips. And actually, I think this might be a board where you can easily get a nice, action surplus, which means Vassal sort of doesn't have its risk. So Vassal's probably nicer than having a lot of merchants here, actually. Like, once you're reasonably thinned out, you might decide, I want to add more cards, because you've got to buy them here, so you want cheap cards to add to get more money and use all those buys from market. And I think instead of merchants, you might go for vassals. So I think this is actually a pretty good vassal kingdom. I think you can support a fair number of vassals. Eventually, you've got to start greening, but if you can get a lot of money from the vassals and the market, so you're not going to spend that many turns buying victory cards. And I think you can have quite a lot of cards and not really that many victory cards in it. Eventually, your artisan might start picking up duchies, and then the vassals start to become a little bit bad. But I think overall, this is quite nice. Maybe you get a council room or two. Maybe if you're both drawing your deck, you don't really care if your opponent gets a little bit of extra draw. So yeah, I think Vassal, this is a good kingdom for Vassal, and you're gonna get a bunch of them. I could see my deck having like 4 vassals in it or something, even though only one of them might be guaranteed artisan, or maybe we top deck 2 cards with artisan and we throne it. Right, like, so yeah, this is actually a pretty good vassal board. I think it gets us money very quickly, which is really good for the abundance of buys with market. What have we got here? This deck has absolutely no village in it at all. It's got sentry, so you're going to try and trash down. You're going to want to play a witch. Because, sentry's good trashing, but it's not guaranteed. Like, and I think the witch is quite nice here. So you want to be... Man, what do we do? Yeah, so we get the sentry, we get the witch. Maybe eventually we buy a remodel and we try and like buy golds, remodel them. I don't think... Is militia good here? Probably not. Probably yes. Maybe we have militia instead of remodel. I'm not so sure. Like, because there's no draw here. Militia is actually really harsh. The only draw is a witch, and you can only play 1. I think what we do is we try and gain like 2 or so sentries, get the witch. Eventually, we swap over to trying to play militia, just because it's really nasty here. And we sort of just have golds. We buy them ourselves to try and get the provinces. And I think Vassal has no room in this at all. It's just terrible. Harbinger. I haven't mentioned Harbinger in my slide. It's really bad. It top decks a card, but you still don't want it for Vassal. Like, you know how I said buying villages to support Vassal was bad if that's all you were doing? Buying Harbingers just to support Vassal is even worse because Harbinger is much less useful. You don't use Harbinger here to support Vassal. Maybe Harbinger here, because you can't draw your deck, is actually all right to like top deck a gold occasionally, but Vassal has no room. Let's not spend too long here. This is not a Vassal board. So that was the 3rd board. Let's take a look at another one. So what's going on with this board? So we have Festival and Throne Room. And labs and council rooms for draw. Workshop. Is it really that good here? I'm not so sure. I think what's better on this board is that we try and draw with labs. And I think you can get away with a council room or two. And I would play Bandit a whole bunch and use golds. Occasionally you might be able to throne room a Bandit and get two. And you're just going to try and draw your deck with labs and council rooms. You're going to have a couple of buys and you just buy like double province turns with a load of golds. I think Vassal has no room because you're going to end up swamping yourself with loads of golds, and you have no real way to guarantee a play. Because, I mean, you could workshop a throne room, but then you could vassal it. Like, maybe you could support a single vassal here, but you really don't want to be playing it during the turn. You want to wait to the end. You've got some reasonable things. But I guess I question, do you actually ever even get the workshop? Like, you sort of want to focus on getting the labs to draw up, and then the festival and the council room and the bandit. Throne rooms are still good, actually. They're still nice to play in the lab. You don't really need the festival, thinking about it. If you throne room the labs, that's an action. You can play a council... Oh, man. Vassal doesn't seem very good here, anyway. It's... If you ever play it, it's a minor effect right at the end just to draw a final card, but you might have spare laboratories for a while that can do that instead, and you don't really need the Vassal to try and get that extra one draw, and the Bandit's just adding money to your deck, so you don't need it for the money. So I think Vassal just isn't worth it here. You have other ways to do what it would do that's a lot more reliable and generally better. Last Kingdom. What do we have here? So we have Chapel for mass trashing. We have Throne Room, but the only way to really use it as a village is to play it on themselves or on Sentry. Even though we have Chapel, Sentry's still quite nice. But there is no plus buy here. Throne Room Library could be okay. Well, there's Militia. Militia sort of sets off your opponent's libraries. I think what we do here is we trash down with Chapel. We try and gain some golds, and we just draw up with library. Maybe do we even bother to hit our opponent with Militia? I think because of the existence of Militia, the library is really nice here. We have a couple of sentries, but I don't know if we really bother with Vassal. I just think I think the lack of a village means... I mean, you can throne vassals, right? That's okay, but you sort of need a high density of throne rooms, which you can workshop, but then you kind of need a high density of libraries, and I think instead of buying loads and loads of fives after you've bought a sentry or two, which I think you still want anyway, you're not going to have too many libraries. I think library might be slightly better just by buying a gold or two. Actually, then again, you don't need to buy the gold. You can buy more libraries if you workshop the throne rooms. Maybe Vassal's okay here, just because you throne it. You only need to throne 2 vassals, and that's all your money. That's all you need. If you can draw that, that's 4 cards. And then once you've played the throne and the vassal, they are cards out of your hand that make it easier to draw library. So maybe Vassal's actually your money here, thinking about it more. Maybe you do get a workshop. You trash down first. Maybe you have a silver or 2. You buy the workshop. You start getting throne rooms, vassals, and you hope to buy libraries. And then you just sort of do this weird engine where you're going to be throning a library, or maybe you throne the sentry, and that's sort of why you're buying it. Just to get the action so you can play a library and just try and throne 2 vassals. And that's as far as you go with your money, and then you just buy provinces one at a time. And the workshop could gain you a gardens at the last minute, just as a tiebreaker thing. Actually, I like that. So I think Vassal, you'd only really want 2, and you're hoping to throne them. But that can work just because it's money that doesn't draw, and so you can use the draw to X from library. Sometimes that's all you need. I guess in this case you wouldn't care if the vassal hits or not. Sometimes you'd actually rather it didn't. That's interesting. I'm glad this one came up. yeah, that's a very unorthodox use of Vassal, but I like it. Anyway, I hope that was interesting for you, and I hope you enjoyed this look through, and I will see you for the next video. Thank you, and goodbye.